They paired me a new alien partner. Nobody warned me her mating season started. Marcus had been through many missions, but this one was different. He was no stranger to alien species, space travel, or danger. But when they paired him with a new partner from the alien species known as the Tarixians, he wasn't sure what to expect. He had heard the rumors, how the Tarixians were strong, independent, and highly skilled warriors, but he didn't know much beyond that. This was his first real mission working closely with them. The mission briefing was short and to the point. His task was simple: join the Tarixian expedition team and assist in exploring the outpost that had been abandoned for centuries on the distant planet Tarix 7. The planet was located on the outskirts of the galaxy, with harsh conditions and little known about the alien culture that had once thrived there. As he sat in the briefing room, Marcus couldn't help but feel the familiar rush of excitement that came with a new challenge. He had always loved the unknown, the thrill of the unexplored. But even with all the training and preparation, there was a nervousness in the air, something he couldn't shake. When the briefing ended, Marcus was directed to the hangar where his new partner would meet him. As he walked through the long corridors of the station, he tried to prepare himself. He had worked with plenty of different species, but Tarixians were different. Their race was known for their complex culture, one deeply tied to physical prowess and mental discipline. They formed strong, almost unbreakable bonds with their human counterparts, but the exact nature of these connections was never fully explained. No one really talked about the details. There was always an air of mystery surrounding the Tarixians. As Marcus entered the hangar, his eyes scanned the area. His new partner stood at the far side, examining a starship. She was tall, even taller than Marcus, with an athletic build that suggested years of training. Her short, silvery hair framed her sharp, angular face, and her posture exuded confidence. She wore the standard Tarixian military uniform, dark, form-fitting armor, a black cloak with silver accents, and a utility belt equipped with various tools and weapons. She had a pair of deep violet eyes that seemed to pierce right through him as he approached. "Marcus," she greeted him, her voice calm and steady. Her accent was light with just a hint of an unfamiliar cadence. "I'm Zyra. It's an honor to work with you." Marcus offered a nod, trying to hide his surprise. He hadn't expected her to look so imposing. He'd heard about Tarixian warriors before, but standing in front of one, he understood just how fierce they could be. "It's an honor to meet you, Zyra," he replied, extending his hand in a friendly gesture. She took his hand firmly, her grip strong but controlled. There was something about the way she looked at him, almost like she was sizing him up, analyzing his every move. "Let's get to work, Marcus," Zyra said after a brief pause, turning away from him and heading toward the ship. "The mission will require all of us working together. There's no room for mistakes." Marcus followed her, a sense of anticipation building inside him. This mission wasn't just about exploring an abandoned outpost. It was about uncovering secrets that had been hidden for centuries. And with Zyra at his side, he had no doubt that the journey would be unlike anything he had ever experienced before. As they boarded the ship, Zyra took her place at the controls, her movements fluid and precise. Marcus settled into the co-pilot seat beside her, adjusting his gear. The hum of the engines echoed through the ship, and for a brief moment all was quiet. Zyra's focus on the controls was complete. Her attention never wavered. Marcus couldn't help but admire her skill. He had seen many pilots, but none with the same calm determination as Zyra. The ship lifted off smoothly, and soon they were soaring through the endless expanse of space, the stars stretching out in all directions. Marcus glanced over at Zyra, noticing the way her eyes flickered from one screen to the next, monitoring the ship's systems with practiced ease. "You seem like you've done this before," Marcus said, breaking the silence. Zyra glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to the ship's controls. "I have. My people have been navigating these skies for centuries. It's second nature to us." Marcus nodded, impressed. There was no doubt that Zyra was a seasoned veteran. She had the kind of quiet confidence that made others feel safe in her presence. It was a trait Marcus respected, especially in a partner. As the journey continued, Marcus couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. Tarix 7 was a dangerous planet. The harsh environment and the remnants of the alien civilization that had once lived there made it a place of mystery and danger. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger might not be the planet itself. There was something about Zyra, something he couldn't put his finger on, that made him uneasy. He had worked with plenty of partners before, but there was a strange energy between them, a pull that he didn't understand. He shook his head, trying to focus on the mission. There was no time for distractions. They had a job to do. The outpost they were heading to had been abandoned for centuries, but the technology there could hold the key to unlocking untold knowledge about the universe. They couldn't afford to fail. The next few hours passed in a blur. Zyra remained focused on the task at hand, while Marcus went over the mission parameters again, double-checking everything. As the ship descended into Tarek's 7 atmosphere, the first signs of the planet's harsh landscape became visible. The planet was covered in sprawling deserts, jagged mountain ranges, and vast canyons. It looked almost lifeless, its surface scarred by centuries of violent storms and seismic activity. "Prepare for landing," Zyra said, her voice steady. "We'll be touching down in the next few minutes." Marcus braced himself as the ship descended further, the planet's surface coming into sharper focus. The ship's thrusters flared, slowing their descent as they neared the landing zone. Zyra expertly guided the ship through the turbulent atmosphere, her hands moving with practiced precision. The ship touched down gently, the soft thud of landing gear meeting the ground a welcome sound after the tense descent. Zyra powered down the systems and turned to Marcus. "We're here," she said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Let's see what secrets this planet holds." Marcus stood up, feeling a sense of excitement building inside him. This was it, the beginning of their adventure. But as he glanced at Zyra, he couldn't help but wonder if he was ready for what lay ahead. There was something about this mission, something about Zyra that felt different. But for now, there was no time to dwell on it. They had a job to do. With a deep breath, Marcus grabbed his gear and followed Zyra out of the ship, stepping onto the alien soil of Tarex 7. The unknown awaited. The desert winds of Tarex 7 swept across the barren landscape as Marcus followed Zyra through the harsh terrain. The planet's surface was vast and unforgiving, dotted with jagged rocks and patches of dry, cracked earth. There was no sign of life, no animals, no plants, just the oppressive silence that only planets like this could provide. The air felt thick with dust, and the sun beat down relentlessly from above, casting long shadows across the rocky ground. Zyra led the way, her movements sure and swift as she navigated the uneven terrain with ease. Marcus struggled to keep up, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, dry sand with every step. He had been trained for harsh environments, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The weight of the planet's emptiness pressed in on him, making him feel small and insignificant. Despite the heat, a chill ran down his spine. They had only been walking for a short time, but the vastness of the desert seemed to stretch on forever. Marcus kept glancing around, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. The landscape was eerily quiet, save for the sound of the wind whipping through the air. He was used to the hum of technology, the chatter of a team, the sounds of life. Here, all of that was absent. Zyra, however, seemed completely at ease. She had been on countless missions to planets like this, where the environment was hostile and the danger was ever present. She was used to the silence, the isolation. She had trained for it her entire life. As they walked, her violet eyes remained sharp, scanning the surroundings with practiced attention. "Keep up, Marcus," she called back over her shoulder, her voice steady but firm. "The outpost is still a few clicks away. We need to make it before sundown." Marcus nodded, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in his chest. There was something about Zyra that was both calming and unnerving at the same time. She was all business, her focus unwavering, and it made Marcus feel like he was being tested in ways he wasn't prepared for. He had never had a partner like her before. She was a skilled warrior, a master of her craft. And while Marcus was used to working alone, something about the way she operated made him feel like an amateur. As they continued their journey, the terrain began to shift. The rocky outcroppings gave way to a series of narrow canyons, their walls towering high on either side. The air grew even hotter, the sun beating down harder, and Marcus could feel the sweat begin to bead on his forehead. The shadows between the canyons were deep, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from within those dark recesses. Zyra didn't seem to notice the shift in atmosphere. She simply moved forward, her pace never faltering. Marcus, however, found himself glancing over his shoulder more often, as though expecting to see something moving in the distance. But each time he looked, the landscape remained still and empty. "We're almost there," Zyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Stay close and be alert. There are ruins ahead. The outpost is hidden inside a large cave system." Marcus nodded again, trying to push the unsettling thoughts from his mind. They had a job to do. The outpost was their mission, and they needed to find out what secrets it held. He reminded himself that this was why he was here, to explore, to learn, to uncover the unknown. As they neared the entrance to the cave, Marcus could feel the temperature drop sharply. It was as though the desert heat had been left behind, replaced by the cool, damp air of the cave. He wiped his brow, grateful for the sudden relief, but still wary of what lay ahead. Zyra was already moving ahead, her hand on the hilt of her blade, her body language tense but controlled. The cave entrance was massive, a gaping maw carved into the side of the canyon. The walls inside were smooth, almost unnatural in their evenness, as though they had been made by an intelligent force. The silence in the cave was even more intense than it had been in the desert, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as they stepped inside. The darkness seemed to swallow them whole, and he had to rely on his flashlight to see ahead. Zyra moved silently in front of him, her senses heightened as she searched for any signs of danger. Marcus followed closely, trying to match her pace. The tunnel they were walking through seemed to go on forever, winding deeper into the heart of the planet. Every so often, they would pass by ancient carvings on the walls, symbols and markings that Marcus couldn't understand. The alien civilization that had once inhabited Tarex 7 was long gone, but their presence lingered in these remnants, in the faint echoes of their once great society. After what felt like hours, they finally reached a large chamber deep within the cave. The space was vast, the ceiling high above them, and the floor littered with debris and broken stone. In the center of the room stood the remains of an ancient structure, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It was clear that the outpost had been abandoned long ago, but something about the place felt different. There was a heavy weight in the air, as though the walls themselves were holding onto some kind of secret. Zyra stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room carefully. "This is it," she said quietly. "The outpost, but it's not what we expected. Stay sharp." Marcus nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and the air seemed thick with something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the remnants of an ancient civilization. There was something alive here, something hidden in the shadows. Before Marcus could speak, there was a sudden noise, a low, rumbling sound that reverberated through the walls of the cave. It came from deep within the structure, and it made Marcus' blood run cold. He wasn't sure what it was, but it sounded like something moving, something large. Zyra's eyes flashed with alarm, and she moved quickly to the side, drawing her weapon. "We're not alone," she muttered, her voice tense. Marcus didn't hesitate. He followed her lead, his own weapon raised, his senses on high alert. The rumbling noise grew louder, echoing through the chamber as something stirred in the darkness. Zyra's eyes flicked around the room, her body poised for action. "Get ready," she warned. "Whatever is down here, it's about to make itself known." Marcus's heart raced, his breath shallow as he waited for the first sign of movement. He had faced many challenges in his career, but something told him this mission was going to be unlike anything he had ever encountered. And whatever lurked in the depths of the Tarixian outpost, he knew they would have to face it together. The rumbling sound echoed through the cavern, growing louder with each passing moment. Marcus's heart raced as his grip tightened on his weapon. Zyra, ever calm and focused, scanned the room, her violet eyes flickering in the dim light. It was clear to Marcus that whatever made that noise wasn't something they could ignore. They were not alone. "Stay close," Zyra whispered, her voice low but firm. She moved with quiet precision, gliding across the dusty floor as she took up a defensive position near one of the broken stone pillars. Marcus followed, doing his best to remain as quiet as possible despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. Every sense felt heightened, and the silence between the distant echoes of the rumbling was deafening. The noise continued, shifting from a low growl to something that sounded almost like a deep mechanical hum. It was coming from deep within the structure, further into the darkness where their flashlights barely reached. The air was thick with dust and tension, the oppressive silence of the cavern broken only by the distant rumblings. Marcus tried to steady his breath as he waited for Zyra's next move. He had worked with many partners in the past, but none of them had made him feel as out of place as Zyra. There was something about her, something different. Her poise, her strength, her unwavering confidence, it all felt alien to him in a way. The way she moved, the way she commanded space around her. It was as though she didn't just belong to this world, but to another entirely. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the noise grew closer, and Zyra's sharp gaze flicked to Marcus. She gave him a small nod, signaling him to follow her lead. Together, they crept deeper into the chamber, moving cautiously and silently like predators stalking their prey. The shadows seemed to stretch further, wrapping around them as they advanced. Marcus couldn't help but feel a strange pull as they moved further into the darkness. There was something unsettling about the atmosphere, something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. It wasn't just the tension in the air. It was as though the walls themselves were watching them, holding on to something they weren't ready to understand. The outpost wasn't just abandoned, it felt alive. Zyra stopped suddenly, her hand raised to signal him to halt. She knelt down beside a set of old, ruined control panels embedded into the stone floor. The equipment was covered in dust, and time had clearly not been kind to it. Yet, there was something about it that caught her attention, something she couldn't ignore. She reached down carefully, brushing aside the dirt and grime that had accumulated over the years. "This is strange," Zyra muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "These panels, they're not completely dead." Marcus moved closer, peering over her shoulder as she examined the ancient technology. It was unlike anything he had seen before. The markings on the panels were in a language that he couldn't decipher, but Zyra's eyes seemed to understand it perfectly. She ran her fingers over the surface, activating a few switches with a careful touch. The room seemed to shift. The vibrations in the air grew stronger, and a low hum filled the space. The walls of the cavern trembled slightly as if something inside the structure was awakening. Marcus's instincts screamed at him to pull back, but Zyra didn't move. She was too focused on the panels, her expression unreadable. "What is it?" Marcus asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern. Zyra glanced up at him, her face tight with concentration. "These are power conduits, older than any technology I've ever seen. They were meant to stabilize something, but what?" She looked back at the panels, her fingers still moving over the surface. "This isn't just an outpost, it's a control center, and I think it's still active." Marcus's mind raced. A control center? For what? The Tarixian civilization had vanished centuries ago. There was nothing left to control. And yet here they were, standing in a place that clearly shouldn't have been functioning, with machinery that had somehow resisted the ravages of time. The hum grew louder, and a sudden burst of light illuminated the cavern, flooding the space with an eerie, greenish glow. Marcus squinted, trying to adjust to the sudden brightness. The panels had powered up fully now, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. The ground beneath them vibrated, and Marcus could hear the sound of distant machinery groaning to life, like a massive engine coming out of sleep. "Something's coming," Zyra whispered, her voice low but urgent. Her hand instinctively reached for the blade at her side. "Get ready." Before Marcus could respond, the ground shook violently, and the rumbling from before became a full-on tremor. The lights above flickered, casting brief flashes of brightness before they dimmed again, only to be replaced by the strange green glow. The air was heavy, charged with static, and the sound of distant machinery grew louder and more chaotic. Suddenly, the cavern split with a deafening roar, and the ground beneath them cracked open. Marcus stumbled back, his feet slipping on the loose stones as the earth trembled beneath him. Zyra was already moving, her body low to the ground, ready for whatever was coming. She seemed to know exactly what to do, as if she had experienced something like this before. But Marcus had no idea what they were up against. The ground gave way completely, and from the depths of the cavern rose a massive shape, a mechanical monstrosity, a war machine from another age. It was ancient, covered in rust and debris, but its design was still terrifyingly functional. The thing towered over them, its glowing eyes scanning the chamber. It was built for battle, a relic of the Tarixian civilization, and it was waking up. Marcus's blood ran cold. He had faced enemies before, but never anything like this. The machine's limbs creaked and groaned as it moved, its massive metal arms swinging in wide arcs. The roar of its engine shook the walls of the cave as it rose fully to its feet, towering over the two of them like some kind of nightmare brought to life. Zyra didn't hesitate. She was already in motion, rushing toward the machine with a speed that left Marcus in awe. She didn't care how big or powerful it was. She had been trained to fight, to face the impossible, and she was going to do it with everything she had. Her blade gleamed in the eerie green light as she moved closer, taking a running leap toward the machine's leg. Marcus hesitated for only a second before following her lead. His weapon was no match for something of this size, but he had his own skills that could give them a chance. He ran alongside Zyra, dodging debris as the machine's massive foot slammed down onto the ground, narrowly missing him. The ground trembled with every step it took, and the air hummed with the energy of its movement. Zyra reached the machine's leg, her blade cutting through the air as she struck at its joints. Sparks flew, and the machine's leg buckled slightly, but it was far from defeated. The war machine growled, its weapon systems coming online as it turned its attention toward them. Zyra's eyes narrowed. She didn't give up easily, and neither would Marcus. He just had to keep up. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as the mechanical war machine loomed over them, its glowing eyes fixed on him and Zyra. The ground trembled with every movement it made, and the air felt charged with an overwhelming sense of power. It was unlike anything he had ever faced before. The sheer size of the machine, its metallic body covered in rust and debris, was intimidating. But what was even more terrifying was the way it seemed to come alive, its systems clicking and whirring as it prepared for battle. Zyra had already launched herself into action, darting toward the machine with the speed and precision of a seasoned warrior. Her blade gleamed in the eerie green light that filled the cavern, her every movement sharp and calculated. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, watching as she struck at the machine's leg with force. Sparks flew from the joints, but the machine didn't seem to notice. It let out a low, mechanical growl, its weapon systems whirring to life. Marcus snapped out of his daze and moved quickly to follow Zyra. He had to keep up. He had to help. He couldn't let her fight this alone. He reached for his weapon, a high-powered blaster that was far less powerful than what they needed to take down a machine of this size, but it was all he had. As he moved closer to the machine, he aimed carefully, firing at one of the glowing eyes. The shot hit, but it only caused the machine to jerk slightly. It wasn't enough to stop it. Zyra had already reached the machine's leg, using her agility to climb up its towering form. She was quick, dodging its sweeping limbs as she made her way to a vulnerable point in the machine's structure. Marcus's eyes followed her, admiration and awe filling him. She was fearless. Every strike, every move was precise, like a predator closing in on its prey. The machine's metal arms swung toward her, but she was faster. With a graceful leap, Zyra avoided the incoming strike, landing on the machine's back with ease. Her blade sliced through the air, aiming for one of the machine's control panels. The metal screeched in protest as her blade struck, sparks flying in all directions. Marcus fired again, this time aiming at the machine's core. The blast caused a brief flicker in the machine's movements, but it quickly recovered. The war machine was built to withstand attacks, and Marcus realized that they would need more than just their weapons to bring it down. Zyra's voice echoed through the cavern. "We need to disable its power source. It's the only way to stop it." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. They needed to get to the heart of the machine where its power core was located. But how? The thing was massive, and the closer they got, the more dangerous it became. The machine's limbs were like massive arms, swinging in wide arcs, making it nearly impossible to get close enough. Zyra, always thinking ahead, moved swiftly along the machine's back, looking for a way in. She reached one of the access panels and pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires and circuits. Her hands moved quickly, working at the exposed wiring, trying to find a weak spot. Meanwhile, Marcus kept an eye on the machine, his blaster aimed and ready. The machine's head swiveled toward them, its glowing eyes narrowing as it detected their movements. The hum of its engine grew louder, and the air seemed to vibrate with energy. It began to advance, its massive foot crashing toward Zyra. Marcus fired once more, aiming at the machine's leg to slow it down, but the blast barely left a dent. Zyra's face was set in concentration, her movements swift and precise as she disconnected a series of wires. She looked over her shoulder at Marcus, her voice strained but determined. "I'm almost there. Keep it distracted." Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He moved toward the machine, firing at its arms and legs, doing whatever he could to keep its attention on him. The machine swung its massive arms toward him, the metal screeching as it moved. Marcus ducked and rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the crushing blow. His heart raced, and he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were running out of time. Zyra's voice cut through the chaos. "Marcus, get to the core. I need a few more seconds." He didn't hesitate. As the machine's massive foot slammed into the ground again, sending a shockwave through the cavern, Marcus sprinted toward the machine's chest, where the power core was located. He ducked under its sweeping limbs, narrowly avoiding being crushed by its enormous arms. With each step, the machine seemed to grow more agitated, its movements more erratic. The closer Marcus got to the core, the more dangerous it became. Finally, he reached the machine's chest, his eyes scanning the area for the power source. There it was, a glowing blue core, pulsing with energy. It was the heart of the machine, and if they were going to stop it, this was where they needed to strike. Marcus quickly reached for a small explosive charge attached to his belt. He had only one, but it was the only option they had left. He attached the charge to the power core, securing it with precision. His fingers worked quickly, knowing that every second counted. The machine's growls grew louder, and he could feel the heat of its engine radiating from the core. He stepped back, eyeing the machine as it swung its arm toward him. "Zyra," he shouted, "it's done. Get out of there." Zyra, who had been hanging on to the side of the machine, heard his call and began to climb down. She moved with incredible speed, her hands gripping the machine's jagged surface as she descended. The machine's movements became more erratic, the power surging in its circuits as it tried to detect the source of the disturbance. But it was too late. The explosive charge detonated with a deafening roar. The cavern shook as the energy from the core erupted outward, sending shockwaves through the machine's body. The war machine staggered back, its massive limbs shaking uncontrollably. The green light from its eyes flickered and died, leaving the cavern in darkness. The hum of its engine began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. Marcus and Zyra both took a few steps back, watching as the machine collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud. Dust and debris filled the air, the shockwave from the explosion settling into a thick cloud. The danger had passed, but the weight of the battle still hung in the air. Zyra wiped the sweat from her forehead, her face a mask of determination. "We did it," she said, her voice steady, though Marcus could hear the exhaustion beneath it. Marcus exhaled slowly, his heart still pounding in his chest. "Yeah, we did, but that wasn't easy." Zyra gave him a small, appreciative smile. "Nothing worth doing ever is." As the dust settled and the noise of the battle faded, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Zyra had been right, they had done it together, and though the battle had been fierce, there was still more to uncover. The outpost had secrets that could change everything. But for now, they had survived, and that was enough. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the reality of what they had accomplished sink in. But Marcus knew this was only the beginning. They had just scratched the surface of what Tarex 7 held. And whatever came next, he would face it with Zyra by his side. The cavern was silent now, save for the distant sound of the crumbling war machine settling into a heap of rust and broken metal. The battle had ended, but the tension in the air still lingered. Marcus stood at the edge of the wreckage, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The adrenaline that had carried him through the fight was beginning to fade, leaving behind a heavy sense of exhaustion. Zyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable. The sweat on her brow and the dust that clung to her skin didn't seem to bother her. She was composed as always, her violet eyes scanning the surroundings with a calm precision. Despite the victory, there was something about her demeanor that made Marcus feel uneasy. She was always focused, always in control, but something had shifted. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, his voice more out of concern than curiosity. He hadn't realized how worried he'd been until now, until the battle was over. Zyra turned to him, her gaze meeting his. For a moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady, but Marcus could hear the subtle strain in it. She didn't need to say more. He knew her well enough by now to recognize when she was pushing her own limits. They stood there in silence for a moment, the echoes of the battle still hanging in the air. The glowing green light from the destroyed war machine was fading, and the cavern was returning to its quiet, eerie stillness. The weight of their success began to settle in, and with it, the realization that they had survived something far more dangerous than either of them had expected. "We should move," Zyra said after a while, her voice breaking the silence. "We still have a mission to complete." Marcus nodded, although he felt a pang of uncertainty. They had been so focused on the immediate danger, on surviving the war machine, that they hadn't stopped to consider what they had actually come for. What was the true purpose of this outpost? What secrets had it been hiding? "Yeah," Marcus agreed, his voice quieter than before. "Let's find out what this place really is." They walked through the cavern past the remains of the war machine. The control panels Zyra had examined earlier were still active, their faint hum indicating that some systems remained functional. The deeper they went, the more the feeling of being watched returned. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, observing their every move. As they entered another chamber, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt colder, the shadows longer. The walls were lined with strange, alien technology, equipment unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It was beautiful in its complexity, yet unsettling in its silence. The machines stood like ancient sentinels, waiting for something to activate them. Zyra moved ahead, her steps echoing in the empty space. She approached one of the panels on the wall and began to study it, her brow furrowed as she worked. Marcus hung back, keeping a careful eye on their surroundings. It was hard to shake the feeling that they were intruding on something that should have remained hidden. "These systems are ancient," Zyra murmured, her voice reverberating off the walls. "But they're still operational. They've been dormant for a long time." "Why?" Marcus asked, stepping closer. "Why were they left like this? Why wake them up now?" Zyra didn't answer immediately. She continued to work, her fingers moving over the controls with practiced ease. Finally, she paused, looking up at Marcus with a solemn expression. "The Tarixians were building something here," she said quietly. "Something powerful, but it wasn't just technology. This place is a weapon." Marcus felt his stomach twist at the thought. "A weapon?" He glanced around the chamber, taking in the strange, alien devices. "What kind of weapon?" Zyra shook her head. "I don't know yet, but I have a feeling we're about to find out." She turned back to the control panel, her fingers flying over the buttons and switches. The screen in front of her flickered to life, displaying an array of alien symbols and data. For a moment, nothing made sense to Marcus. The symbols were completely foreign, and the data seemed to shift in and out of focus. But Zyra was undeterred. She continued to work, her expression intense. "Help me with this," she said, her voice tight with concentration. Marcus moved to her side, leaning in to study the display. It was hard to make sense of the alien language, but Zyra's knowledge of the Tarixians and their technology was vast. She had worked with their systems before, and it showed in the way she moved through the code. As she worked, the room grew colder, and the hum of the machines grew louder. It was as if something was stirring in the depths of the outpost, something ancient and powerful. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Zyra," he said, his voice low, "what exactly are we dealing with here?" She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flicked across the screen, her face tense. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression grim. "This isn't just a weapon," she said slowly. "It's a power source. A force capable of altering the fabric of reality itself." Marcus stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You mean this thing can change the laws of physics?" Zyra nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It can do more than that. It can bend time, manipulate space, and it can alter consciousness." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. "That's insane." Zyra met his gaze. "That's why they abandoned it." For a long moment, they both stood in silence, taking in the enormity of what they had uncovered. The Tarixians had built something far more dangerous than just a weapon. They had created a tool with the power to reshape everything, time, space, and reality itself. And now, it was alive again. The hum of the machines grew louder, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Marcus felt a wave of unease wash over him. They had come here for answers, but they had found something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Zyra stepped back from the control panel, her face pale but determined. "We need to stop this," she said quietly. "Before it's too late," Marcus nodded, his mind racing. They couldn't let this power fall into the wrong hands. But how? How could they possibly contain something this powerful? "We can't do it alone," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We need to call for backup. Get the authorities involved." Zyra hesitated, her gaze drifting to the glowing panels and the flickering symbols on the screen. "It's too risky," she said. "If we bring in others, we might lose control of the situation." Marcus understood her concern. This wasn't just any weapon. It was something far more dangerous, something that could change everything. But the thought of facing it alone was just as terrifying. "We don't have a choice," Marcus said. "We need help. We have to stop this before it spreads." Zyra nodded reluctantly. "All right, I'll contact the fleet, but we need to make sure this place stays secure. We can't let anyone get to the power source before we do." They exchanged a brief glance, both of them understanding the gravity of what they were about to do. The stakes had never been higher. The power they had uncovered in this abandoned outpost could change the galaxy, and they couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. With a final look at the control panel, Zyra turned away, her expression resolute. "Let's go," she said. "It's time to finish this." Marcus followed her, his heart still pounding in his chest. The mission was far from over. But one thing was certain, whatever happened next, he wasn't going to let Zyra face it alone.